Halo Infinite themic gloves. Part 11 of making Halo Infinite cosplay. In this episode, we're talking about how to scale and attach the gloves. Let's start with the scaling. Once you've downloaded the gloves, they'll look like this. For the sake of the video, we're just going to focus on the index finger, but you can apply the same method to the rest of the fingers. Drag and drop the files into your slicing software. I'm going to be using Bambu Studio. I'm going to grab the file that's labeled top index. This will be the best one to scale first, as it's a full ring and you're going to need it to fit around your finger. Once you've scaled this one, you can apply it to the rest of the index parts and they'll fit together nicely. In Bambu Studio, there's a measure tool. This is going to help us measure the width of the part. We're going to measure the widest point of the ring, which you can see in the video here. Right now it's scaled to 15.5 millimeters. Jumping to the desk camera, I'm going to show you two ways to measure the width of your finger. You can either use the paper method or calipers. If you don't have calipers and you're doing cosplay, I strongly recommend getting them. They're really useful. If you don't have any, I'm going to show you the method that anyone can do if they have a piece of paper. Using a pen, paper and scissors or some sort of blade, cut a strip of paper that's maybe 1 centimeter wide and long enough to wrap around your finger once. You're going to pin one end to the outside of your index and wrap it around the inside. Where the paper meets and crosses over, you're going to get your pen and mark that distance. Once you've made that mark, unroll the paper and measure it with your ruler. Mine came out to 6.5 centimeters. So we're going to take that number and input it into this website, which turns circumference into diameter. So I typed in 6.5 and it gives us a diameter of 2 centimeters. Now I can verify this by using my calipers and measuring the width of my finger. If you've never used calipers before, they're very simple. When you turn them on, make sure you zero them at their closed state. Then it's time to measure. In this case, I'm going to measure the width of my finger and it's going to give me a really accurate reading. Here you can see 20 millimeters, which is about 2 centimeters. Now you have the measurement of your finger, we're going to go back into the slicing software and we're going to scale up the piece until we can fit our finger in there. Since I've done this before, I know 135% scale will be big enough to fit my finger in there with a glove on. And on that point, make sure to take account of wearing a glove. So you might need to add a couple mil or, a bit more depending on how thick your glove is. Couple of measurements you want to take are the top here and on the underside here. You can just measure those with a ruler and then in your slicing software measure the model and make sure they'll fit on your finger or at least be a little bit smaller. That's the hardest part out of the way, so once you've got that scale you can apply it to the rest of the parts on the glove. Again, using the measure tool, you want to double check that those parts will fit over your finger. So here we have a measurement of 21.5 millimeters and we're going to double check that it fits over my finger. I grab my calipers and I measure the part that arm is going to sit on. Keeping in mind I need to bend my finger and when I do it's going to add some extra width to my finger. So even though 21.5 millimeters looks really wide, it's actually going to be enough tolerance for when I bend my finger. Scale up the fingertip and double check that the widths and the lengths work on your finger too. The top plate can be a little bit more tricky to scale because the hands of a Spartan are built weirdly. Import the files and arrange them like this. Next, grab a ruler or your calipers and measure the width from the outside of your palm to the inside of your thumb. This measurement doesn't need to be 100% accurate as long as it's in kind of a rough ballpark. My hand is about 9 centimeters wide and you can see that the parts at 100% scale are already that width. To see the full width of the parts, you can do a group select and it will show you in the software what that width is. Whilst keeping that selection, you can scale up or down and it should do all the parts at the same time. I highly recommend doing some test prints to make sure the scale's right before you sand, paint and glue the gloves. I'm not going to show you how I sand or paint them in this video because I've done that in plenty of other videos which you can check out on my page. For the glue, I'm using Loctite Super Glue Power Gel. Get yourself a pair of black gloves. These can be these thin ones or you can get some tactical gloves if you prefer a chunkier look. I highly recommend using Accelerator to speed up the process. Finally, you're going to need lots of pairs of gloves. I recommend doing 2 layers of nylon gloves and then put your actual gloves on top of that. This will make the fitting quite tight, but that's good because we want the glue to set against something. Arrange the glove parts so you know exactly what's going to go where. The last thing you want to do is glue the wrong part to the wrong finger. I start by applying the super glue directly to the finger and making sure it covers all the area around it. I then slide on the first part, which is the top index piece. I'm going to make sure that it sits nicely before I use my accelerator to lock it in place. This should accelerate the glue and make it cure instantly. I've had some cases where it's still not set instantly, so give it a couple of seconds to kind of settle down. Depending on the thickness of your glove, sometimes it can glue itself to the nylon gloves underneath. So I recommend pulling the end of the actual glove you're using to kind of disconnect it from that glove. And repeat that process throughout the gluing stage just to make sure you're not going to get stuck in there. Here I'm just fast forwarding through the process of doing the exact same thing for each of the digits. And you can see what they look like there. Next, I'm going to do the kind of midsection of the finger, and what you want to do is place that down and then place the fingertip on the end. This will help you space that midsection correctly. The last thing you want to do is put it too far down or too far up and have an awkward space. And then the process repeats, add a generous amount of glue and activate it with Kicker. Once that's set, you can move on to the next part, which I like to do the thumb. Here I'm just spacing out each part, and I'm just going to do that kind of black knuckle part first. I recommend avoiding adding the fingertips whilst you're gluing the other parts on, because they make it quite cumbersome to hold the pieces whilst you're adding the glue. After a little bit more time of these parts setting, I just want to twist them a little bit and pinch them a little bit to dislodge them from the gloves underneath. I'm going to add the knuckle parts next, and these can be a bit finicky, so be patient with them. Add lots of glue and lots of Kicker. Onto the top plate, I'm going to place these down and do a little dry fit test first. Once I'm happy with that, again, process repeats, apply glue and lots of Kicker. You can then assemble the rest of the parts. And that brings the video to an end. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, it helps me out a huge amount. If you got any questions, leave them in the comments below, drop a follow and share this with your friends. And that's how to make